This version of the podcast is mixed in mono, but if you would like to listen in 5.1 surround sound, please visit ufocast.co.uk/prisoner for more details.
This is episode 17, but we recorded it last.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of By Hook or By Crook, our Prisoner podcast. And I'm here, as ever, with my co-host Michael. Hello, Michael.
Hello. And I'm guessing we've got a number 3.
We do. We have our final guest of the series. And as you know, Michael, this has not been smooth. We've had to cancel this episode for various reasons on various sides about 4 or 5 times now. But thankfully, here we are. We're recording this the day after our episode on the girl who was deaf went out.
Finally.
After a pause. So this will be going out in 2 weeks' time. So listeners, you are almost in time with us finally. But yes, our guest is one Rick Davey, who I think Prisoner fandom will be familiar with, a runner of the Unmutual website. And I've published stuff about the Prisoner, so who better to have on our final episode than Rick? Welcome, Rick.
Hello, great to be here. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
So yes, what we tend to do on these episodes is we start by asking our fellow visitors why they are fans of the Prisoner, how they first got into it. So let us know, when did you first encounter the Prisoner?
So I am one of the many people who are currently celebrating their 40th anniversary of the first time they saw the Prisoner. So I first saw the Prisoner on Channel 4 in 1983. Which Arrival was aired 40 years ago, about 2 weeks ago. I was 10 years old, and my older brother uttered the immortal words, "Ask your mum if you can stay up tonight. There's something on the telly you might like." So I stayed up. I think he knew I was kind of interested in kind of slightly off-the-wall stuff, even at that age. So as well as, you know, your stuff like Blake Seven and Doctor Who, I was enjoying stuff like Sapphire and Steel and stuff that was slightly off the wall and probably unusual for a 10-year-old to be watching. I probably would have thought. But yeah, so I stayed up. 10 o'clock, Channel 4. Arrival came on. I video recorded it as well as watched it, and I was just blown away by it. And then the following week, as your listeners will probably know, because I think you've discussed it, on the Channel 4 run, they showed the odd ordering of the warehouse order, which meant that Many Happy Returns was actually screened second. Now, as aficionados now, we think to ourselves, well, that's an odd episode to put second. He's clearly been there a while, and how have they let him out so soon? But when you're 10 years old and you watch an episode like Many Happy Returns, it absolutely blew me away, and I was hooked for the next 17 weeks. I'd never seen, and I still have never seen, a series like The Prisoner. It's the only time I've ever watched something where, and I know you could say the same thing about things like Twin Peaks and Lost, it was the only time I'd ever seen anything where I could watch it on 2 levels. I could watch it as a straightforward action-adventure series, and I know you two have discussed this in previous episodes, or I felt like it had something to say. I felt like this series was trying to tell me something even at that age. So I watched it. I watched the whole 17 episodes. We had a very temperamental VCR. It was a top-loading Akai, the top-loading video recorders we had in those days. You never knew if it had recorded anything until you'd actually watched it back afterwards. So sometimes it wouldn't record the sound. Sometimes it wouldn't record the picture. Sometimes it wouldn't record either. So I ended up with about half the episodes, and then had to wait, 3 years until Channel 5 released them all on VHS. And then I managed to sort of pick up all the copies of all the episodes. And I've been kind of hooked on it ever since. Every time I watch, you discover something new that you haven't discovered before. I've kind of had to watch it a lot of times because I've researched it for various books and for the Blu-ray sets and so on when I did the text commentaries for those. But it's a series that every time I watch it speaks to me, and I can't think of any other series that has done that.
So I guess you've alluded to this anyway just now, but on what is your interpretation of the Prisoner? We've discussed various ones with various guests over the course of the podcast. How do you watch it, or is it always that kind of multi-level thing of like, well, I'm watching it as a literal spy thing, and then there's kind of the deeper meaning level? What meanings do you see in it? And I guess you've just sort of said that that's changed over the years. So what do you see as a 10-year-old? What do you see now, 40 years later?
Yeah, I think I was aware as a 10-year-old that it was telling me something. Whether I was fully aware of everything every episode was telling me, I'm not sure. Did I get all the nuances of Free for All, for example? Did I really fully understand what was going on in Fallout? Probably not, but I knew enough that it was telling me something. That I can sum it up my feelings now in probably one sentence. I think the series is saying or telling us that we are all prisoners of ourselves and that there is no escape from that because of the village that we build around us. The whole world is indeed the village. The village is all around us with our government and so forth. And I think Patrick McGoohan foresaw so much of what we see in 2023 with state control and constant surveillance, the CCTV cameras, media manipulation, fake news. So much of that is true of 2023. And I think I always understood that that's what was being told to me as I was watching the episode. So if you watch Free for All, it is all about, there's that great scene where he's being interviewed by the Tally-Ho reporter and the Tally-Ho reporter is writing what he wants. Well, that is completely true about our media today. Absolutely. Yeah. When you look at the political sphere that we find ourselves in at the moment, whatever your politics, you've got to agree that the era of Donald Trump in the US and the era of Boris Truss Rishi Sunak here is kind of a village-like entity, if I can put it politely like that. And I think I was always aware, even as a youngster, that McGoohan was trying to say to me, look around you, your society as a whole, not you personally, but society as a whole is just building a prison for itself and taking away people's individuality. Individuality is not a thing to be proud of these days, apparently. We've all got to conform. Now, that's true to some extent. We need to conform. We don't want to all go around murdering people. But there needs to be kind of, or even on a small scale, some sort of inner rebellion amongst us all. Otherwise, we just end up being robots. And what's the point of us being here at all? I was kind of always aware that was kind of what McGoohan was trying to say. One might argue that he wasn't trying to say that. And that's the great thing about The Prisoner. We can all interpret it in different ways, can't we? We can all have our own interpretation, or we can have no interpretation at all. You can watch it as a really cracking spy adventure series about a man held captive. You don't need to go any further if you don't want to. The problem is with that is that then when you get to Fallout, watching it on that linear level of it's an actual story about a spy held captive, the last episode kind of becomes slightly more nonsensical. So I think you have to take the last episode seriously. You have to take on board that it is an allegory. And I think the more times I watched it, the more I got that if you take it literally, then yes, you get a good spy story, but you probably end up with disappointment with the last episode. You watch it as an allegory of life around us, Fallout suddenly makes a lot more sense.
So, I can totally see that point of view. Obviously, a lot of people in 1967 didn't see that because we understand that the reaction to Fallout wasn't particularly positive.
To say the least.
But also for yourself as a 10-year-old, how did you respond to Fallout when you first saw it? Because I think I was probably a similar age to you in the 90s when I first saw Fallout. So how did it strike you when you first watched Fallout?
That's a very good question. I'm trying to do this at the moment because I'm having a kind of rewatch in the Channel 4 order at the moment. So I'm trying to kind of relive what I first thought about the program as I first saw it. And I'm trying to rack my brains. And I actually emailed my brother about this because I watched all the episodes with him. And I can't remember fully what my reaction to Fallout was, other than at the end, I remember turning around to my brother and said, what a great ending. And he agreed with me. Now, a lot of people don't. A lot of people think that's, it's a terrible ending. But I think my opinion was at the time, and I think McGoohan in an interview said something similar. I remember thinking to myself, how else could that have ended? If you'd have just had the big reveal, he whips the mask off, and there's some guy chomping on a cigar with a big white cat going, ha, 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 I'm from your government, and I've been running it all along. That kind of would have been A, predictable, and B, a bit of a cop-out. So whether I fully understood, the references to, dem bones, dem dry bones, or whether I understood about, resurrection and all those kind of undercurrents, which may or may not, depending on your point of view, be in that episode. I'd probably argue that I didn't get those, but I understood enough that it was about the fact that you can never escape. When number 6 tries to shout his individuality in front of the jury or whatever you would call those people with the robes and the mask, he's shouted down. He cannot be an individual. And I very much understood that as a 10-year-old, and understood the very last scene where the door on his house opens automatically. It was very clear to me then, and is now, he hasn't escaped. And the reason he hasn't escaped is that he lives in the village, because we all do. I kind of got that at the time. Someone could turn around and say, but that's not what it means, you're an idiot. But that's what I took from it, and that's what I still take from it today. Some of the nuances, no, of course I didn't get them when I was 10. It's only in kind of researching the series and finding out where certain things come from that you learn a little bit more about maybe what McGowan was trying to say. But I think I mentioned this earlier on, what's great about it is that you could give me your thoughts on what the episode's about. Michael could do the same. And they can be absolutely, completely different to what I've said, but they're equally valid. Whatever you think The Prisoner is about is what it's about. And that's why it's such a great series. It's not put on a plate to say, this is A, this is B, and then it ends up at Z. What this series does is it says to you, it gives you the ingredients, a bit like a recipe. It gives you a load of ingredients, make a nice dish out of that. Now, you can take whatever ingredients you want from it to make that, so you could end up with, a nice pie, or you could end up with, some pate or something. It's whatever you want to make from the ingredients that you're given. And when I was 10, I took some ingredients, and I may well have taken some of the wrong ones. But over time, I've built on that. And it is true that every time you watch the series, I think anyway, if you want to watch it on a level that's beyond its action adventure, then you're going to see certain scenes and you're going to think to yourself, especially if you stop and think. I'd always advise people to watch an episode and then just spend 10 minutes just at the end of the episode, just having a sit and a think about what you just watched. You will come up with things that maybe change the slight way that you were thinking before. I think that's particularly true of Fallout, because there are so many interpretations of so many of the things. And also there is a danger. Don't tell anyone I said this. There is a danger that you can read too much into everything as well, and some things were just serendipity as to the production process. We must remember that. People say, "Why is it set in a cavern?" Well, it's set in a cavern because they already had the set from the making of Battle Beneath the Earth, and they needed to use it, so they used it for Girl There Was Death and Fallout. People can read into it and say, "Oh no, a cavern means that you're in the depths of despair," and you could interpret it that way if you want, but we need to always remember that The Prisoner was almost a prisoner of its own production process in a way.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I didn't know that. I think a lot of the I'm probably more well versed with the production of Doctor Who than I am with the Prisoner. So I've learned from people like yourself and others who we've had on. I've learned more about the production of the show. I definitely didn't know that the set was one that they had knocking around that they were going to use.
Neither did I. Not at all.
Let's come to you, Michael, as we dive into Fallout. We've come to the end. We've had 16 previous episodes of The Prisoner.
This has taken us so much longer than we thought.
It's taken us, I think, a couple of years to record all of
these.
Yeah,
getting on for 3.
Was it? Really? Was it 2020?
It's two and a bit years. It's more than 2. Because in one episode, I actually say, I'm almost 50, and now I'm not.
Yes. Well, and I'm almost 40, so we definitely weren't that when we started. So we've come to Fallout. You've seen this episode, as with all the rest of them, many times before. I guess I'll ask you the same question I asked Rick. How did it strike you when you first saw it on those Channel 4 repeats? And then how does it strike you now?
Yeah, we covered this in episode 0. My dad walked in and he went, "Watch this, you'll love it, and you'll hate the last episode." And my dad was right. I didn't take away the things that you said early on, because I had that head canon thing. It wasn't that my expectations were very low, as I kind of suspected the 60s original audience were. They were kind of, yes, we've invested in this weird drama, we're expecting a payoff for things to be explained, and what we get is an explanation that is a metaphor and I don't think a lot of people were expecting a metaphor, and I kind of wasn't either. So this is my least watched episode because of that, because of the baggage I brought along. And I kind of, when you've got friends that agree with you, because that's what kind of friends do. So me and my best mate Andy, when we watched this, he had pardon my French on this one, but he said, yes, the last episode, it's a load of symbolics. And that was how he described it, because he knew, he'd been in prisoner fandom, he'd read up and he'd learned all about what things were supposed to mean, and like he said with the caverns, it could mean this, but what was the whole story supposed to be about? And he's still in the village because the doors open automatically at the end, which, to be fair, I'd not even noticed. I'm being honest with you. I thought the butler had opened the door. I wasn't paying that much attention. I didn't understand how he could have driven from, like, the logistics was still the things that were in my head. I got Leo McKern being brought back from the dead. I kind of accepted straight off. Sci-fi, spy drama, not a problem. Sort of thing we see in the Avengers all the time. But I think I had too much baggage originally to enjoy it on that. I'm going to see it as a metaphor kind of a way. And because people had told me what to think beforehand, I kind of just went with it because it was easier to agree. It was easier just to go, yeah, this is the episode where he just goes on trial, but not really. Oh, that's the bloke from The Girl Who Was Death. But wasn't that a dream? How does he know him and what's going on? So is this a dream as well? I was thinking, and it was like, oh, look, and the Beatles are in this with all it. And I get that. But I just didn't take away a lot from it. The them bones business was just, I just found it irritating. And it just wasn't for me at the time. It just wasn't. I've rewatched this. I mean, how many times did we almost record this? Like 3 or 4 times. Right. So I tried to rewatch it before each one so that it was fresh in my head. And I made copious amounts of notes. I really did. So I saw more on the run up to these chats than I've ever seen before, than I've ever paid attention to before. And I must admit I've enjoyed it a lot more, but I couldn't help but be glib as I've always been. The thing about Garth Marenghi when he said, well, there are some authors who use subtext and those people are cowards. It's like, it's so obvious, but there's so many. It's like, why are there so many globes in the room? Why there's so many questions? And then, because there was so much stuff in my head, so much baggage that I was questioning, so many questions, I made the mistake of going to the McGowan interview that he did. That's on the Blu-ray. Right. That's on YouTube. I think I sent you a link. And it's the series is summed up by him as being exactly what you've just been discussing. Was just, oh, how can I put this? My wife sums it up really well, and I hate having to use other people to illustrate my points, but she was at college, university, and they're doing poetry, okay? So they're having this chat, and the lecturer says, this poem is about A, B, C, D, and E, right?
Right.
And she says, sometimes a poet just wants to write about the sky. It doesn't have to be about something else. And the poet's not here to ask. So the lecturer and all of, received, or fandom in our case, has presented us with all of these theories about what it's about. And it's about, it's a metaphor for his life. Yes, he's back on Earth. Yes, you couldn't possibly have had the James Bond ending. This is a James Bond ending. I'm sorry. He's in a massive cavern. There's the big things going up now. People have got machine guns. There's all sorts of weird cult things going on. This is a James Bond ending. This is not what they're saying. This is the most spy thing. There's a bit where Leo McKern's character's talking to number 1, the rocket, which could be a droid as far as I'm concerned, because it's got an eye, and it's just like Luke Skywalker talking to R2-D2 because it's just bleeping. And Leo McKern understands what the rocket's saying, or the cylinder. And there's loads of filmy stuff going on in order to distract you from, yes, it's a metaphor, which is what we've brought to it. And then in the interview, you watch McGowan say, well, I didn't just want to do the spy thing. I wanted to do this. Oh yeah, whatever you want to bring to it, that's it. So what's made The Prisoner, what's made this episode so important is us. They just wanted to finish it, to give us an ending that filled all of the boxes that they wanted to tick, to be as odd as McGowan's character, or as McGowan himself is, not give us what we were expecting, to subvert our expectations, which is what this is, but still do it within the Lou grade spy drama-y thing. But there's the business with the masks being pulled off, the globes, the orbits.
Before we get,
sorry.
I was going to say, no, it's good. Before we get into the weeds of your notes, I'll just give my reaction.
Please,
and again, as
tell me to shut up and do
no, it's fine. It's fine. As we said in episode 0, my introduction was my dad saying, as this show that I used to watch when I was a kid. I mean, he was 13? Yeah, he was 13, 12, 13. This thing I watched, and it's about this guy who gets kidnapped, ends up in this village where he's trying to escape, and they're trying to break him, and he turns out to be number one. Like that was like I knew that from the off, and obviously,
let's have the spoiler before we begin.
As we've kind of said, we've alluded to this throughout the run that like obviously that is a big spoiler for the final episode, and as I said, I think a couple of weeks ago, I don't think that actually is as much of a spoiler for the series as a whole as like, because it's not. It's like, I mean, let's annoy all of our listeners who really don't like Doctor Who, but it's like any modern description of Doctor Who that you read, you go on Wikipedia and it says, and the opening paragraph will tell you that the Doctor is a Time Lord, right? And I would always say that if you're going to write a description of Doctor Who, that's irrelevant. Partly because some of my favourite stuff is from the 1960s, and obviously you don't know that he's a Time Lord from that, So there's the fact that number 6 is number 1 is an important detail for this episode, but actually it's largely irrelevant for most of the show. And I was also, because he'd said that this was this big revelation of Fallout, I was expecting something a lot more elaborate, and the actual moment is quick, brief, and then we get on with the rest of the episode. And so I think I was slightly wrong-footed by it, because I was expecting something different.
Oh, you mean like in a kind of a James Bond evil clone version of himself kind of thing?
Well, I was at least expecting number 1 to speak.
Fair enough.
I was expecting them to have a conversation, and obviously they don't. It's just this kind of brief reveal, and then on we go.
Can I just tiny jump in there? It was so brief when I first saw it, and I wasn't taping it, and it was so quick that I was expecting more exposition later on to follow, that I didn't really spot that it was McGowan, because it's so quick, and I was watching it on a fairly small black and white TV in my bedroom.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, who is it then? It's a monkey mask. What's going on? And a monkey mask comes off, and it's just this sweaty man cackling. And I was like, well, and I honestly didn't grasp. Well, you know what I'm like with faces anyway.
Yes.
When it comes to characters, if they're in the wrong place or in the wrong setting. So seeing that, I didn't really realise that that's who it was. I was, well, who is number 1? I still don't know. Sorry, I'm interrupting. Go on.
No, but I think that makes my point. That, though I guess obviously thematically, and as Rick, you've alluded to, and maybe you could unpack this a bit more. But it's important in the sense of like the message of the story being about we're all prisoners of the village because we've all built these prisons for ourselves. Number 6 is number 1 because ultimately he is the architect of his prison. I mean, is that kind of how you would expand on it, Rick, or would you go with it in a different direction?
Yeah, our own worst enemy is ourselves, and that's true as us as an individual. Every mistake you've made in your life was your own fault, essentially. And I would say the same thing, and we can say the same thing about society around us. However much take any political decision from the last 20 years, but it's our fault because we voted in whoever made that decision. So. You're absolutely right. Number 1 is your own worst enemy. your own worst enemy is yourself. That's how I would expand upon it. But Michael's absolutely right, and so are you, that it goes by so quickly in that episode. I mean, there must have been people that just looked at the floor or dunk a biscuit in their tea, and by the time they've looked up, the scene's gone, and then they would have got to the end of the episode and gone, well, we never did find out who number one was. But then there's another clue at the end, because of course he lives at number one. His house in London has a big number one on the door, and then the door opens automatically as he walks in at the end. So you do get another very subtle clue, and I've got to admit, and on a black and white telly in the corner, no one would have noticed that, especially in 1967. But I don't think all the way through it was important who number one was, funnily enough. It is a spoiler, as I said. But when I was watching it, I was more interested in why he was there and who was keeping him there, rather than the person in charge is kind of irrelevant. The same as it's irrelevant today. It doesn't really matter who the Prime Minister is, because he's controlled by backbenchers.
So number one is a MacGuffin. It's just something to force the plot forward. Arguably.
Or through the first 16 episodes, yes.
Right.
Yeah. I would say so. I don't think that's important, because it isn't important. It isn't important, really, who imprisons us in that sense, because as I mentioned, we've all imprisoned ourselves. You can moan about the government, but we voted for them. Well, whichever government that is, whether that's a red government, a blue government, or
no, it actually blue and yellow one. Early on, like episode 2 or something, we've got the signs that say questions are a prison to yourself, and the questions that we're asking, we're craving exposition so much that we've imprisoned ourselves in that mindset, because we want, as an ordinary TV viewer, we're sitting there going, well, who was it then? Well, I've hung around all these many weeks to find out. And you haven't. You've hung around all these weeks because you're enjoying the drama and seeing someone fight the system. So I can see your argument.
I'd agree with what you just said as well. Yeah, I absolutely would agree with what you're saying there. But I think, isn't that what makes the programme so much, I don't want to use the word better, so much more unique, if you like, than other television programs, in that if you don't have that, we don't have these discussions for the next 56 years. We just have a program, with an ending.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah, it finishes with, and in, like you said, with the Wikipedia entry, when they find out that number 6 was number 1 all along, and it was really obvious, and you're like, well, I mean, I know I've been going on about the whole Alex Cox and the cloning thing, but if we ignore that, because there are characters who reappear.
Go ahead. I want to hear what Alex Cox's explanation of Fallout is.
Yeah, it's incredibly boring. It genuinely is. I'll discuss that in a minute. But one of the things he mentions early on is that there's several people, like the gardener and the electrician, who are all the same person, and he thinks that there's a whole cloning thing going on in the village.
Right.
Now, the argument that number 6 could be number 1, but using the mind swap technique, kind of works, but that would have been more pandering towards what I wanted from an exposition, where number 6 and number 1 could, like you said, have talked to each other. Why have you put me here? Well, I've put you here because you're the original designer of the village. That's why you're here. That was my theory all along. That's why they weren't allowed to mess with his head too much.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But
the thing is, we do already have number 6 talking to himself, or rather, we have Patrick McGoohan talking to Patrick McGoohan in Schizoid Man. I mean, obviously, that episode makes it very clear that Curtis is a different person.
Yeah.
And there's never explained why Curtis looks like number 6, right? Yeah. Whether it is plastic surgery or what. The prisoner has already kind of given us there's another person that looks like him out there in the world. Why not have another one?
You're completely right.
So
I stand corrected.
No, I'm just saying. I think we're all in agreement that it makes more sense to interpret Fallout not on a literal level. But actually, the show has given you a way of kind of going, okay, well, there is more than one person that looks like Patrick McGoohan.
You can still watch Fallout on a literal level, and you can exactly with the conclusion that you've made. And I don't know if either of you have listened to you're probably both, being Doctor Who fans, very familiar with the work of Big Finish, who do Doctor Who audio dramas.
A little bit.
They also did an audio version of the Prisoner series, and when they did Schizoid Man, they did have an explanation. They said, he is a clone. We are cloning people. So if you want to take that literally throughout the series and say, in Fallout, he's looking at a clone of himself, And then underneath that, you could say, well, the allegory of that is that your own worst enemy is yourself. You can do that, but if you want to take it literally, then you can have that conclusion.
No, you're right. And because of my approach to this episode, I am on record, and I've said this many times, I prefer the ending that Nick Briggs did to the TV version.
Which I still haven't listened. I haven't listened to it yet, so no spoilers for the Big Finish audience.
It's different.
Yeah, no, I'm aware. I'm aware of that.
But also in the extras, Nick talks about some of the other theories, like that the prisoner takes place in the last few moments of death, and things like that. The whole thing takes place in that. So there are other theories about what the series means that I'd never come across, that he's obviously looked into before he arrived at this is his version.
And I think I'm not blowing any trumpets. I think I'm on those extras on the Big Finish Series 3, talking to Nick about that. There is a theory that when number 6 is gassed in the opening sequences, what follows in the next 17 episodes is his death dream. You know, it all takes place in the 30 seconds between the gas coming through the keyhole and him hitting the sofa. The whole series takes place in that 30-second sequence. That's a perfectly valid theory. It's not one I subscribe to, but there's no right or wrong. That's what's so brilliant. You're not wrong at all. You keep trying to almost excuse yourself, Michael. Don't do that. What you see, what you take from Fallout is exactly what it is. What I take from Fallout is exactly what it is, because it's a very personal thing. You do the same thing.
Yeah, I see that.
I can listen to a music track and think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You could watch it and think, well, it's the most rip-roaring thing I've ever heard. They're very different emotions, and Fallout does that, unlike any other thing. Yeah, there are things that make you talk and chat, and you can talk about, pick a Doctor Who story, and you'll have some fans who love it and some fans who hate it. But essentially, the plot is the same for both people. Both fans will know what the plot has been about. You can't have the Five Doctors isn't an allegory. It's a story from start to finish, and you either love it or you hate it. The Prisoner, you can watch on so many different levels and take so many different things from it, but nobody's right or wrong. So don't apologise for saying what you're saying, Michael, because what you take.
So what we're actually back to is my wife's argument about the poet, because in the interview, McGowan's saying, I tried to do this and this and this. And because we are, it's like the location of meaning within a text. We are removed from it, but we've also experienced it through the medium of TV and through repeated viewing, and not particularly in the way it was intended, but we've taken it apart more because of its cult TV nature, and very much because of this episode. The fact that we can argue about it, it's like we can go on chat shows and violently disagree with each other, because it is so interesting, so ingrained in. It's part of our culture. It's part of who. It's literally, we've all made it part of who we are, in various degrees. It's sculpted your career. It's sculpted my take on the world. It's had different effects on you. But we've all taken stuff away from it, and it's 17 episodes of an old TV series.
Yeah.
Bless Sapphire and Steel, bless those other weird cult TV programs. But this has actually affected our psyche, and I'm not blowing its own trumpet here, but I think it's affected our psyche more than McGowan intended. Because
But who knows what McGowan intended?
No.
And I suppose, so I guess where I struggle with Fallout is that on one level I would have preferred something more explicable, because I to some extent rail against the death of the author. That's kind of like, I don't know how long academically that has been like the mantra, that like the author might have meant whatever, but that doesn't matter, particularly if they're dead. They can't say anything else, and we can say what we want about the text, And I actually, this is one of those things that I end up being quite hypocritical about, actually, because sometimes when you do then have an author kind of try and explain their work, you go, oh, I don't like that explanation. So in this instance, I'm going to subscribe to the death of the author. But often I'm like, no, actually, I would like to get to the bottom of what the author was was going on about. And the thing about your wife's thing about the teacher going, "This is what this poem means." I love Judith Kerr, her reaction to being told what her book, The Tiger Who Came to Tea, was about. That somebody said, "Oh, it's about the Nazis invading or something like this," and she was like, "No, it's about a tiger who came to tea." Right? And basically saying, look, you can read whatever subtext you want into the story. I didn't put it there, which is fine. Obviously, if you kind of go with, well, it doesn't matter what she thinks, then you can say it's about whatever you want it to be about. I'm quite happy to say, okay, well, she wrote a book about a tiger who came to tea, and that's the level on which I read it with my daughter anyway, because she's 6, right? We're not going to kind of have conversations about, well, what does this actually mean, and so I think I kind of I tend to kind of carry that through to a lot of things. I'm going, well, I would actually like to know what the author was intending, but then you have something like Fallout, which is so opaque, as to be, as Rick has said, and I think I agree with you in this instance, Rick, that like it does mean whatever you want it to mean, but I come away from it each time thinking, oh, if only it was just a little bit more obvious, And I think
and I think you're in the majority. I think I am slightly in the minority, in that I am blissfully happy with Fallout. I think what's interesting about the author is that McGowan almost at times has said that he's not actually bothered whether people knew exactly what he was saying with each of the scenes, as long as they got angry about it. He said he delighted in the fact that people shook their fists at him in the street and said, "What's all this?" And he's going, because at least people were cared, at least people were getting angry, at least people were trying to think about what was going on in their lives around them and why they were being affected by a TV show. You shouldn't get angry about a TV show unless it's telling you something. So I do have a bit of sympathy for what you're saying. And again, neither of us are wrong with each of our views, really. So I do have a lot of sympathy in what you're saying. It would be nice if there were some things which were explained on screen, but then would we be here now if everything every scene was explained and there wasn't anything that was kind of, why is that there? Why is that song there? Why is he dressed like that? Why are there globes? Why are there orbit tubes? If we didn't have those questions, would we still be sat here? I don't think we would. And then I think that'd be a shame, because I think part of the fun of The Prisoner is reading people's views. Whatever you think about Alex Cox's book, you enjoyed reading it, even if you disagree with his conclusions. And that's probably true of most people's views on The Prisoner.
Simple question. Now, I've always thought that right, so you've got your Leo McKern character gets brought back from the dead, and then you've got example of rebellion number 3, which is The Prisoner. Right, we're on board with both of those. But the young man rebellion, the anarchist, what's all that about? Because I just don't get it. It felt like filler. It genuinely felt like they had a certain amount of time to fill, and they had to have the rebellion of youth. But I wasn't quite sure, because the Liam McKern character ends up heading to the House of Lords and taking up his role again as part of that. And he is also rebelling against the village in the sense of, and the thing that disappoints him is that he just gave in so quickly. I get that. Performance-wise, beautiful. But I don't get the them bones business. I just don't get it. And I don't think I got it when I was a teenager. I was never rebellious. I'm too dull. But this guy was the psychologist from the episode that was Mind Control, and I can't get beyond that when I'm watching this.
Right.
I can understand why people think that. Problem is with ITC shows, and The Prisoner is one of them, is that you do get actors playing different characters in the same series. It's difficult to divorce from that and think, okay, I've got to think of him as a separate character to the one we saw 2 or 3 episodes ago. But that is the truth of the matter. He is a different character. He's in Alexis Canner's in 3 episodes. Kenneth Griffiths is in 2. Christopher Benjamin's in 3. You do get actors. Michael Miller's in 4, I think. You do get actors who appear in various episodes. They're clearly playing different characters. The reason that he is there is because whatever Leo McKern, yes, he rebels in one way. Patrick McGoohan rebels in another way. They are still the establishment. Leo McKern is still representing government. Number 6 is still representing adult establishment figures. The point of number 48 is that you can't change society unless youth is doing it. Take climate change today in 2023. Us older people putting out our recycling or whatever is not gonna rescue climate change. The only people that can do that are the next generation, because they're the ones that are going to have to live with it. And that's what Alexis Canna's character in Fallout is representing. You cannot rebel as a 50-something adult who's part of the establishment. You can do little bits here and there. As number 6 found out, you don't get anywhere. You raise your fist at the system, but at the end of the day, you don't escape. The only way that society can escape its own imprisonment is if the youth all collectively get together and say, we need to change how society works. And that's what Canna was representing. And the Dem Bones song, I'm not a religious person, but Patrick McGoohan was to some extent. He trained to be a priest at one point. He was a devout Catholic at certain points in his life, not towards the end. But I think Dem Bones comes from Ezekiel 37, if I've got my reference correct. And basically the song represents, if you don't think as an individual you can rise up, you're wrong. I mean, in the Bible, it's because of the will of God you can rise up and walk again. These bones going to walk around. So the reason that song's in there is to represent, look, if you stand up and walk around collectively as individuals, you can rebel and you can change the system. You can't do it unless you do it en masse. And that's the message of Alexis Canna's rebellious youth character. It's not one person rebelling, it's youth rebelling and changing society around us, because only a generation as a whole can do that. The odd person here and there can't. That's
that is a
right.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
I mean, I
get it. That's fine.
That I mean, as you say,
I'm not right. There's no right or wrong. I don't want.
Yeah.
Because this is just a personal theory, piecing together bits of production, bits of interviews, and my own interpretation. I'm not right, so you might sit there and say, "Oh, okay, brilliant," but that I'm just as right as the next man. The next man could walk in and say, "No, it's not about that at all. It's about this, and this," and that person is exactly right. This is the beauty of the episode. You can listen to what I've said and say it's rubbish, or you can listen and say, "Oh, I get that," but neither answer's correct. Just an interpretation. And that's what McGoohan gives us. He lays enough things on the table for us to take things away. Whether he wanted us to look that deeply into it, there are things he said where he has thought to himself, people are just taking this a bit too far. This isn't what I wanted people to be talking about. But my take on that rebellious figure and on that use of the song in the episode was as I just described. You can take that to be a load of hogwash, or you can like what I've said. That's totally everybody's freedom to do that.
Yeah. Well, by your own lights, it's a valid explanation, but it's a valid explanation that we can all reject if we want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I it's funny. I've not massively thought. As a Christian myself, I've not massively thought about the religious implications of it. To be honest, I know obviously I know that McGoohan was a Catholic, and that informs certain aspects of how he went about his life and everything. And I actually, my parents live very close to, and I did for a long time, to the Catholic, to where they rebuilt the Catholic Church that he was part of. So where the community he grew up in was a bit further away from where I lived, but that church disbanded and then it was rebuilt just up the road from my parents' house. So it's one of those weird links that I have with him, but it's not one that I've thought much about. But obviously, as you say, the Dem Bones thing is a very blatant biblical allusion, and one that one assumes that more people in 1967 would have related to, because we were more of a Christian country in 1967 than we are now.
But it is.
I'm not sure people would have picked up on it, though. I must admit.
It's
I think
more of a black and white minstrels thing, which they would have got from,
Black and white
Saturday Night
minstrels.
TV singing. Well, no, it is.
Yeah.
It's an old
Yeah.
revivals thing. And
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But no, I mean, as you say, like, from your interpretation, Rick, you're talking about, well, this is youth kind of rising up. But as you were talking, I was like thinking, well, as you say, it's the breath of God in the vision that Ezekiel has. God says, prophesy to these bones, but it's the breath of God that brings them all back to life and clothes them with flesh and everything, and then they go on living. So it's funny, you can interpret it on the level of like, well, it's a bottom up youth revolution, but actually, if you kind of think more about the biblical story, it's actually a top down God.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's God who is saying, it's only
Let's
through
have a zombie army.
It's well, no, not that. I think
No.
it's because if you go back to Genesis, it's the breath of God that brings all of us to life, and then I suppose that links in with McKern, because McKern has literally been resurrected in front of our eyes with a massive Dalek plunger in his face. Like he literally died the episode before, and has been brought back to life. So there's that resurrection theme going on, So I'm spitballing now, really, as we think.
There's a shot where he's grabbed by the security guards and he's putting in the crucifix pose. McKern.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
It does appear throughout. You're right.
So there's a lot of similarities, but getting on to the episode as a whole,
Right.
you've got your trial sequence, you've got your sequence where number one isn't revealed. Then you've got a rocket taking off. Then you've got driving a bus driving on the back of a camper van to London via God knows where the village actually is located. I mean, they said you can survive in this truck for months, but it looks like they're on there for a week and they're just chucking stuff out the window. It feels like it's become an episode of it actually feels like Help. Like it feels like a Beatles film or the what's it called? Magical Mystery Tour. It feels more like the last 10 minutes feels more like that. Or I was watching this and my wife went, "You've got to do some research, haven't you?" I was like, "Yeah, I just need to watch the end of this episode of the Prisoner." And she went, oh, "Okay." She's seen that. She's the only prisoner she's seen is the last 10 minutes, and she was going, "Is this an episode of the Monkees?" Because that's how it felt to her. The high speed thing, the business where they're all dancing in the truck. The series loses it. They're having a party to celebrate escape, but as you said, they've not escaped. But the sped up film, that running for a bus, it looks like it literally looks like a Beatles film. So I think she was right by going, "What the hell am I watching?" Because she was giving me an honest reaction to the series. So what's your take on the very end? I mean, I know the business with the door opening, we get that, but what was your honest reaction?
Well, the first time I watched it, I can't remember what I thought. I remember I enjoyed it, and I remember I liked the music, which I still do. I think the music's fantastic at the end of Fly. Some beautiful pieces in it. I really like the last 10 minutes. I don't see it as slapstick or whatever at all. I really like it. The scene where he's explaining to the policeman exactly what's been happening to him for the last 18 months is fantastic. I love the fact that McKern at the end is kind of revealed to be, okay, he is British government. I love the fact that Alexis Canner's thumbing a lift one way, then he crosses over the road and he's thumbing a lift the other way again, because he's kind of, as always, youth is kind of doesn't know what direction it wants to go.
It goes the way the wind blows, yeah.
Things going on in those last 10 minutes. Yes, you can analyse how does the truck get there if they're supposed to be on the south coast of Spain or whatever that they were supposed to be in one episode. Have they been on the road for a week? Is the village just near Dover on the A27 or whatever? Yes, you can look into those things if you really want to and analyse those and go, okay, yeah, that might be a plot hole. But I just think it's joyous. I think those last 10 minutes are just beautiful television. We'll just have to agree. I'll have to agree to disagree with your good lady.
That's fine. No, that's absolutely fine. But I think that was part of the baggage that I was bringing to the episode was that there was so much stuff that had been hinted at that I was just sat there going, it started off with the rocket taking off, and I was going, right, I'm confused now. What's going on? And where's Fenella Fielding's voice? And then I think I was just. I know Hitchcock says an audience would rather be confused than bored, and he's right, and that's what's going on here. I was more confused, but the explanation from from number 6 to the policeman when he's explaining what's happened, but he's doing it using some sort of mime, and there's like you said, the music's great. I don't know, maybe I just wanted more, and I know a lot of people genuinely hate this episode, but hate doesn't belong here. Confusion does, and like you said, metaphor and allegory and all of those things belong here as well. But the thing is, if you get caught up in those things, you do forget that it's about retaining your individuality, retaining a sense of self, being better and making the world better, which is a perfectly decent message for any series to have. So maybe I just need to forget all this nonsense and just get on with being myself.
I mean, you could say that there's so many great films, there's so many great pieces of television, and again, I don't know too much about you personally, but you both seem to be big Doctor Who fans. You could take whatever the greatest episode of Doctor Who is. Part 4 of Caves of Androzani is kind of an episode which people throw out there as to say this is the very best of Who. You can throw that and say, well, when he's lying on the sand, why doesn't the bloke still pull the trigger when the mud's coming out of the ground? You can ask these questions, and you can pull up a plot hole out of any series at all. So yes, of course, in a 17-episode series, you'll get, especially one where they're kind of rushing the production process and the writing process slightly at points, especially when it comes to the last episode. Yeah, you can find bits that if you really want to focus on and pull apart, you can. But I think it just depends on how you saw it the first time you saw it. I didn't think of that when I first watched it. I wasn't hung up on how did they get there in the truck. I was just hung up on the fact of, wow, they've got out. Have they? That was what was in my head. You're not to have had what you had in your head, because that was what was in your head. So I think we're kind of formed. Our view of Fallout is formed very much on the first time we saw it. I've never met anybody who disliked it when they first saw it and now love it, or vice versa. I think you either loved it at the time and you still do, but you find reasons why you love it as time goes on, or you were confused by it or disliked it, and that will never go away. I don't think there's
No, you're right. You're completely right. It's the rule of first exposure. It's like the first version of the Hitchhiker's Guide that you experience is usually your go-to version in your head. The person
it's
who
the
read
radio
the book
series.
first.
It's the radio series, by the way.
Is
it's
it
the
radio series? Yeah, sure.
TV series for me.
Is it the album? Is it you know what I mean? Yeah, but that's their primary source, and everything else radiates from that. So you're right. You're completely right, and also you're very right in the sense of you get your whatever your think is. You kind of there becomes an article of faith, and it just becomes something that gets dipped in wax and becomes more solidified as time goes on. So in that case, let's just stop making podcasts.
Here's an interesting question, because as I've said before, my experience was VHS tapes, my brother buying them, and so it was whichever tape we got next. And so I watched it sort of... Arrival definitely was something that I saw at least halfway through. But subsequent to that, once I got hold of them all on VHS myself, and once I got hold of the DVD and the Blu-ray, is that I don't think I've ever really dipped into The Prisoner. I think it's generally one of those things where when I come back to it, I'm like, right, now is the time to rewatch again. And then you watch all 17 episodes over the course of however long it takes to fit it into your life at that point that you decide to rewatch it. Which is very unlike my approach to Doctor Who, which I've barely ever watched in seasons, because I'm like, I fancy watching, like you say, I fancy watching Caves of Androzani because I want to see bleak Doctor Who at its peak, or I want to watch The Horns of Nimon because I want to watch a pantomime, you know. But this is a series that pretty much universally I come back to and go, right, I've got to watch the whole thing, which means you start with Arrival and you go all the way through to Fallout. And actually, I'm not entirely sure why I do that, because you can just largely dip in, and as we have discovered doing this whole show, because it's taken us 2 years to rewatch the whole thing and podcast about it in a completely random order, And
is it respect? You kind of respect it enough. You're treating Doctor Who like a member of the family. You're like, yeah, let's just do that. But with this, it's kind of important, and you want to give it a bit of reverence. And also, it's only 17 episodes. You can.
But I think that might do that. I think that might be part of it. It's just that you can't do it with Doctor Who, right? I've never attempted to rewatch. I mean, obviously, because you've got the whole missing episode issue. I've never tried to watch from An Unearthly Child through to whatever the current episode is, because I don't have the time, and also I'm not that bothered. Whereas, I don't know, it just, like you say, there's 17 episodes. It kind of feels like it's doable once in a while. You go, okay, right, now I feel a prisoner itch. Right, let's watch the whole show.
Right.
And yet actually, because Fallout doesn't really, it gives you an ending, but it doesn't really give you that conclusive ending that you definitely crave, and I think I crave to some extent. I'm like, well, why do we do it? What do you think, Rick? Is this something? Is it you've obviously watched it lots in kind of the course of research, but is it a show that you dip into, or is it a show that when you come back to it, you're like, no, I've got to watch the whole thing from Arrival to Fallout? Or
I've not really thought about it, but you're right. Obviously, if I need to check a fact, I'll put an episode on to see that I need to check that car number plate is whatever, things that you have to check. But yeah, when you're watching the series, I don't think I've ever thought to myself, do you know what? I'd like to watch Checkmate tonight, or I'd like to watch Girl Who Was Death. I have always watched it in a sequence. I changed the ordering. I mean, that's a whole debate in itself that I know you've mentioned several times about what's the best order to watch the episodes in. So I have watched it in many different orders. But no, I think it's because when you watch an episode, whichever episode, if you were to watch an episode, out of sequence and just say, right, I'm just going to watch Schizoid Man, I think you automatically think to yourself, I should have watched Arrival, because that explains how we got there, because you see it in the opening sequence. And if you're going to watch Arrival, then you kind of want to watch other episodes where he is kind of finding his feet, so Dance of the Dead, Chimes of Big Ben, or whatever. And then because you've watched them, you think, well, I've got to watch the last two because they form part of it. So you end up watching all 17 anyway. You can argue, should we miss out a couple? There are episodes which could be described in inverted commas as filler, but I've always thought that it's a series that is only made up of its whole, not of each individual component. So yes, there are episodes that are better than others. There are episodes which you could argue are more essential than others. But I've always viewed The Prisoner as a 17-hour-long drama, not as I view Doctor Who as a collection of stories. Even if you want to watch, Hartnell, it doesn't kind of have much. It doesn't really have a story arc. The characters change, and you see the characters develop, and Ian and Barbara leave and whatever. But it's a collection of stories, and you could say that about most TV. I see The Prisoner, even though there's not a story arc, I see it as a 17-hour-long drama. I guess you can change the scenes around in that drama and put them in different orders, but it's essentially a 17-hour-long drama. Is how I've always seen it. Because when I was watching it at the time, I didn't want it to end. But then when it ended, I never once thought to myself, that's a shame, I wish there were more episodes. It just felt like the perfect thing.
Okay. But then I suppose we are now used to arc storytelling, aren't we? I mean, it's been a staple of. I mean, it would now be weird to not make a TV show that was one story spread over a season or multiple seasons, or you definitely have an arc that goes over a particular season, and then like that is how we make TV today. I don't know what I'm trying to say with that, but like, I mean, I recently, because the new Babylon 5 animated thing came out, and I watched it, and then I was like, okay, this is revisiting a whole bunch of moments from Babylon 5, and I get that, but I haven't rewatched Babylon 5 for a while, so I started a Babylon 5 rewatch, and I'm sort of halfway through season 1, and I'm like, well, now I have to watch the rest of the 100-odd episodes that there are, and all the movies and all that kind of stuff, because that obviously famously has very tight control at the top from one mind kind of over all of it, in a similar way that you kind of think about Patrick McGowan in relation to the Prisoner. But that does seem to be like that is how we do TV today. like, and it maybe The Prisoner was one of those places where that started.
Shall we do our very exciting Doctor Who actors thing, or have we seen everyone?
Well, I was. Have you? I mean, unless Rick, have you got anything else to kind of say about Fallout
Of course,
before we dive into Spot the Doctor Who actor?
I'm very excited to dive into the Doctor Who thing. I don't really have anything to add about Fallout other than anyone listening to this that thinks that they believe that they know what the episode is about. I would encourage everyone to stick to that belief, because if you believe that that's what it's about, then that's what it's about. Even if you think it's something utterly ridiculous. The only time I get annoyed is when people get production. I don't get annoyed. That's too far. But when someone gets a production fact wrong, then that kind of can be a bit irksome. When it comes to interpreting The Prisoner, as long as it's not something which is utterly demonstrably false. So we know, for example, that Living in Harmony was a drug-induced hallucinations to try and get. If that's not about anything else, so we can't really interpret that. But Fallout and the series as a whole, interpret it how you like. If that's what you take from it, then you're not wrong. It really annoys me when people have a go at other Prisoner fans. You do see it online. That's the curse of social media, really, isn't it? You do see people saying, well, that's not what it's about. How do you know that's not what it's about? It's about whatever you want it to be about. And that would be my message to anybody listening, is that whatever you think Fallout's about, that's what it's about. If you dislike it, I'm really sorry, and I'm gutted in a way, because I feel quite protective of The Prisoner. I love the programme. And I always feel sad, not angry, I just feel sad when someone says they don't like it, because I wish they could feel the joy that I feel, when I watch Fallout. But that doesn't mean they're wrong.
Yeah.
We still loved it enough to want to do this entire podcast.
We do, yeah.
So don't feel that we hated it. We'd rather watch this than almost anything else.
I should have. I wasn't meaning you personally. I was more thinking of the people online that say,
but yeah.
Whatever. I mean, the fact that you loved it for 16 episodes, then when you got to the last episode, it just didn't quite have what you wanted. You still love the other episodes, so
exactly.
All good.
Yeah. Okay, well let's do Spot the Doctor Who actor, and I'm just going to preempt anything by saying that we've already done Angelo Muscat because he's in almost every episode, and as we said the first time he turned up, he was a Chumbly in Galaxy 4, and Michael Miller. This is his. I think you said. Did you say this is his third or fourth performance?
Yeah, I think it's his third. I did say fourth earlier. I think it's his third.
Yeah. And because he's behind a mask, you just have to identify him by his voice and his beard. But again, we've covered him before in previous episodes when he's appeared. So based on that, I don't think there's anybody else. Michael, did you spot anybody?
You know I didn't.
I know you
but
didn't.
I did say on the on the subtitles that Mike Reed was one of the people in the masks from Runaround. Now that'll mean nothing to you because you're too young. But trust me, there'll be a handful of listeners going, "What?"
Well,
so
I see him listed as an uncredited jury member.
Yeah.
I know the name. I know the name Mike Reed because he was in EastEnders.
He was in EastEnders, yeah.
Is this where we've actually got a potential Doctor Who link?
It is. You've preempted me. You've preempted me with a bit of genius reference to 1980s kids telly. Yes, Frank Butcher from EastEnders, otherwise known as Mike Reed, back in the late 60s, was a background artist / failing stuntman, and appeared in lots of these kind of ITC series, and indeed he is one of the masked jurors in Fallout who shouts down number 6. Now you might be thinking, but Frank Butcher, aka Mike Reed, is not in Doctor Who. Well, it depends what you class as canon, because in the early 90s, in between McCoy and McGann, there was a thing called Dimensions in Time, a Children in Need special, which the Doctors ended up on the EastEnders set, helped by characters like Mandy and Big Ron, and in one of those Dimensions in Time segments was Mr. Mike Reed playing the part of Frank Butcher. Therefore, in Fallout, we have a connection to Doctor Who. And I'm going to annoy
Genius.
Who fans now.
And that sums up my feelings towards this episode as well. It's not quite a perfect link, but it's a link and it's there.
But anyway, but no.
Yes.
I mean, I'm going to say, as I said before, canon in Doctor Who for me is whatever counts for you. Yeah. And because Dimensions in Time was, barring a channel hopping glimpse of something in the McCoy era when I was 5. Dimensions in Time was the first Doctor Who I ever watched. Okay, and most people will say, "Well, that's a terrible place to start," and I'm like, "Well, in one sense, the only way is up." But at the age of 9, I loved Dimensions in Time. I actually absolutely loved Dimensions in Time. I didn't know what was going on, but we were staying. My parents were away, which was a rare thing. We were staying at somebody else's house who was looking after us for the weekend. They'd got the 3D glasses from wherever you got the 3D glasses from, and we watched it.
Times.
And I was like, what is this? But I very much enjoyed it, and I've seen it again since. Obviously, you can find it on YouTube if you must. And it is complete and utter bobbins, but it's enjoyable bobbins.
It's our bobbins.
Yeah, and it's ours. And as I say, but obviously I have a soft spot for it because of where and I also so Samuel West posted on Twitter sometime in the last year or two about it, and kind of people saying it wasn't. He was like, does it count? Have I been in Doctor Who? And I was like, of course it counts. You're Samuel West. If that's your only appearance in Doctor Who, of course it counts. Don't let anybody tell you that it doesn't count, because yeah. So that's my take on that. So yes, we can add another. Mike Reed definitely goes on the list. Tick.
Brilliant. Well done, Michael, for getting in there first.
It was because I looked up, because I've got the Blu-ray playing in the background, and I was going, Mike Reed? Ah. Can I just thank you for coming and being on this? And it was worth the wait.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I'm glad that we finally managed to make our diaries work without
And it's
disasters.
Been an absolute pleasure, and it's been even more of a pleasure to know that, Michael, you've been reading my text commentaries on the Blu-ray set, which I wrote.
Certainly have. Every single one.
I hope you've enjoyed them.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess it only remains to say thank you, Rick, for being here. And
never do, Danger Man. Have me on again.
Well, we'll see. We'll file that one for future reference. So all that remains is to say goodbye from you, Rick.
Goodbye. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening.
And it's a goodbye from me. And I will leave, as ever, the final word to Michael.
Be seeing you.